quite different. We're going to have a town hall about what happened last week. So it's kind of a strange transition, I mean. And where's Rich? Benjamin, please come on stage. We have a real political expert that's going to help me with this, but we really want to have a conversation with you. And this is one for which the house lights really do need to come up. I believe that's possible now. Rich Benjamin is a writer and a political pundit and wrote a great book called Whitopia, where you spent a year in the three whitest counties in America. Was that right?
2 years.
2 years, okay. Yeah. 2 years in the whitest, and he still has a smile on his face, but this is a guy who's got a pretty good personality, so he can take a lot. But so he has a real perspective on some of the really key issues that are, maybe you would say, driving this country apart at the moment. So what do you think just happened last week?
A lot happened that's going to help determine the future. I'd like to go to a slide, my first slide.
Okay, your only slide, right?
My only slide, okay, of course. Good. It's a takeaway, it's a map. I figured this tech room might like maps. By the way, between the AI people, the blockchain people, and the doctor, I've never been in such a high density of dim-witted people than this room. Okay. But
of which kind of people?
Dim-witted.
Really? Oh.
No, I'm kidding. Okay. I'm saying the brilliance.
You're being facetious. Okay.
Yeah, just the brilliance.
Oh.
So,
okay. That's not the right slide.
I'll talk through it before we get it. One of the takeaways I've seen, and this is a little accelerated from 2016, is the two indicators of polarization and the two predictors of partisanship in this country are geography and race. And so I'm beginning to look at maps of how this plays out. And by geography, I don't just mean rural versus urban. I mean how people are living in counties. So as you said, if we go back to that slide, there are roughly 3,000 counties in this country, and then 271 of them qualify as Whitopias. And by that I mean they're already extremely white. They've experienced population growth from 2000 to 2010, and the majority of that growth has been from white people. And so Donald Trump won 94% of those counties in 2016. 67% of that vote in Whitopia went to Trump, whereas he won 46% of the popular vote nationwide. And just so I went through the 2018 midterm results, and I just wanted to look at where the votes are going. So this is for the Senate races. And what I'd like to point out there, what is interesting is here we have Tennessee. This is like ground zero of Whitopia in the sense that you have Knoxville, you have Nashville.
No, it's true. My brother lives near Knoxville, and I was going there, I was like, where are the black people? It's like, it's just the South. I thought that it's like really, East Tennessee is extremely white.
Well, when I said it was ground zero, what I meant is there are more counties that qualify as Whitopia.
There's a lot of very white places there.
Yeah, and Marsha Blackburn won quite decisively against what Democrats thought would be a competitive opponent, Phil Breedson. On the other hand, David, another interesting note is if you look at Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, and I'm sorry for butchering her name, was competitive in the Whitopias that exist in Minnesota. So that's some interesting realizations there, is how Democrats are seeking to compete better in suburban counties, in rural counties, in exurban counties, versus in some counties, as I said, in Tennessee, in Missouri, where Republicans were quite dominant.
Okay, two things. First of all, we've set up bars in the room. So we're starting the reception now in here, and then it will sort of move outside when we finish in half an hour or so. So if you want to, like, lubricate yourself, you can. Second of all, and I just want to throw in another piece of this. You know, the title of the session is Tech Transformation in the Midterm Elections, and I made some comment at the beginning of what I'm interested in part, is, you know, I think in this room, based on just what we've heard so far, this is like a quarter of the conference that we've experienced so far today, you can see there is an amazing panoply of very rapidly moving transformational technologies that are going to affect the way we live, right? So one of the questions that I want to ask to you, but also to anybody in the room, is how does that affect the political context? I mean, and for example, maybe I'll ask you this. I think I at least told you I was going to ask you this. But anybody in the room who has comments on these kind of things, I'd be curious to hear from you. You know, a lot of people tomorrow and even Tuesday will be talking about cities and how urban areas are moving even more rapidly with some of the technological changes that are happening with self-driving cars and scooters. Forget about scooters, but you know, there's a lot of things happening that are really different in urban areas. Urban areas are already politically different, right? But one of the things that I ask myself, and maybe this is a crazy question, but somebody who was going to come, a very close friend of mine, couldn't come, but has already got an order in for one of those flying cars that Larry Page has got. What's the name of that company? What's it called? Kitty Hawk. Yeah, they're going to start delivering those things like in 9 months or something. So flying cars are actually coming, right? Yeah. Not to mention autonomous vehicles. So if cities are where people live differently, is there a possibility that the parameters of cities are going to start to expand and actually suck in some of the rural America that is now in a different mind space? I'm just asking, is that a crazy question?
No, it's not a crazy question, but for me, it's not just the element of technology. It's what we do in terms of policy, in terms of business development and making these places habitable, in terms of, people said in terms of housing, what housing markets do, in terms of what business markets do. So it's not just that people migrate for reasons of migrating, it's all these other factors that are surrounding the technology that you're describing.
Okay, but let me ask you another
gas prices,
another related
how
question.
People age.
Here's a related question. Okay, you're talking about these Whytopia counties. That's very interesting. Why are the cities so different politically?
Well, I think density does something. I think density does something to people's viewpoints. I think cities tend to be destination points for migrants and immigrants in a certain way that changes our views on immigrants. And people in Whytopia told me, and by the way, you know, it wasn't all door. I golfed, I hunted, I fished, and people told me that even for them, they realized that low density, the idea of space, made people more conservative.
Really?
And yes, it informs their ideas of the Second Amendment. It informs their ideas of their freedom and their individualism, their ideas of safety. And so density and proximity is an element of this.
Okay, that could cause me to flip the point I made before.
Okay.
I mean, if we're moving to a context where people can literally live anywhere, maybe more people will be surrounded by space and become more conservative. I'm just asking. I do think that we are going to see demographic changes as a result of technological changes, which is, I mean, the cities happen because of the automobile and other things, right? Yeah. I'm just.
But if we have a planet, and then there's that element.
Does anybody agree with any of that? Yeah. Okay, please, yeah. Get the mic. Wait, Jody, hold on. Okay, there's a mic for you.
What's the average population of these
counties? That is Jody, right?
Yeah, Jody Westby. What's the average population of the counties, the Whytopia counties?
Pardon me?
What's the average population of the Whytopia counties?
There's no average population.
They're
Some
small?
of them are as big as St. George, Utah. By the way, let's make this more concrete for folks. How many of you are familiar with Bend, Oregon? How many of you spent time in Bend? Okay, that's an example of a Whytopia. How about Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, near Hayden Lake? Okay, that's another example. So there's no, they vary. And there's some in Vermont, so I wouldn't say there's an average population.
Oh, okay, here. Get the mic over here, and then back there. This is meant to be a town hall, so we're going to like just respond to what, or not respond.
Sorry. So for me, one of the reasons why we have concentrations of population in cities is access to opportunity. And so perhaps these new mobility options will give new ways for different populations to access opportunity. But that doesn't really come to the question of the Whytopia, because I'm really kind of curious to hear more about the Whytopia and why that evolved, and a little bit more of your views on that. But I think, David, we're going to see with autonomous vehicles perhaps heaven or hell. Heaven being we're going to have more electrified, autonomous, shared fleet. The hell is that we have the spread of exurbia so that one can now commute for 2 hours and sleep.
Yeah.
And so we have now suburbs in places which are now natural habitat. So there's these two vectors, these two pathways which we could see. I think those are pretty well documented too.
Tell us who you are just before you let go of the mic.
Chris Lubkeman, Director for Global Foresight Research Innovation at Arup.
Okay, good. I want to just carry the mic myself back here. That's what town halls are like, right?
Hi, and Paul Brody from EY. Just a question. When you talk to the people in these white-topias and they're voting overwhelmingly for Trump, what reasons they cite to you, and do you see them using their media or technology differently than you would in, say, urban areas?
For them, technology is a means of opportunity in terms of telecommuting, in terms of sort of siphoning out the way you can do business and live in an ideal rural community with suburban perks, right? So you have your good coffee shops in an exurban area where you have natural resources, bike trails, hiking trails, golfing. And your question was, how do they use technology differently? There's no, I haven't detected a difference in technology other than what David is describing in terms of the scooters and in terms of how city people are imagining technology. But when we talk about hardware and when we talk about business use of technology, I never detected any differences.
And they make cat videos roughly same percentage in cities and rural, white America. I mean, cat videos are everywhere. Okay, that's all. That was a bad comment. Okay, let's.
I could put it that way, yeah.
Here.
So one of our observations is,
You're at Ford.
Ken Washington Ford. So my company, and I think a lot of our competitors, are very, very focused on dense urban centers because that's where we believe we can make economical sense out of autonomy and connected car technology and other technologies like other mobility services. So how does that play into your understanding of this emergence of this Whitopia view? Because I don't believe that the suburban settings are going to be the place where we deploy some of these game-changing technologies first, because just the economics just don't work.
And why not?
Because you don't have the density of use.
The density of use. Well, it's something that we've discussed in Techonomy, the way in which different geographical locations are getting spread out, and the way entrepreneurs, for example, Austin McLeod from Data was saying that in fact, in more rural areas, that's where technology is going to boom because of better real estate prices, lower overhead. So I guess it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and there's some interesting work done by some research done at the Santa Fe Institute by Jeffrey West that indicates that there are scaling laws that apply here that lead you to, sort of nature leads you to believe that the density in the large urban cities creates these opportunities. So it'll be interesting to watch it play out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to carry it. I want some gender balance, but okay, I'll give one more guy here. Because I know he's going to ask a provocative question, since
perhaps.
he's Corey.
Corey Johnson from Ripple. The notion of, it sounds like what you're describing is white flight or white concentration in certain counties, right? Growth of population. So it sounds like what you're saying is not that these places are less dense, but that they're becoming more dense and more conservative as they become more dense. And I would posit that the reason cities and urban areas tend to have more open-minded views about people that are different from themselves is because when you sit in a class like Welcome Back, Kotter, and you've got a Jew sitting next to a black kid, sitting next to a white kid, sitting next to a Puerto Rican kid, or you've got Juan Epstein, who's a couple of things, you have to have a different view. And that being in an urban area forces you to see people who are different than you and interact with them and find out that they're not that different after all. It sounds like your ideas are in conflict with that.
So to your first point, these places are more dense than they were before, but they are still far denser than inner ring suburbs and from cities proper. So yeah, that's true. And your second point is absolutely right. I describe my work as white flight 3.0. So the first generation of white flight was when we had the highways bill and the GI Bill and housing in the 50s. And then after the urban riots, so to speak, and I use that in quotation, we had the second generation of white flight. So this is indeed the third generation of white flight. And it has less of a racial change than the first two generations. And it is what I'm speaking about, technology, what residents called when I interviewed them, more housing for your dollar, better opportunities for kids, closer to natural resources, et cetera, et cetera. To your point about, I don't see how that's opposed to say that just because we're closer to different people than us, ethnically, nationality-wise, sexual orientation-wise, that informs our viewpoint. But it's still a form of polarization where as the map showed you, the midterm elections did not decrease the polarization that we saw in the 2016 presidential election. But I don't follow how those 2 points are contradicting.
It just sounded like what you were saying is that being further apart from people makes them more conservative, but you were talking about places that were growing. It just sounds like they're not growing quite into being cities yet.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I want a gender balance question. Does anybody, or comment? Jody was one. Okay, please.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Aranda. I have a quick question for you. So as the demographics and Hispanics are much younger, so as that generation starts to grow up and we start losing the Whitopia baby boomers, how do you predict that's going to change, and what are we going to see next?
So thank you for that question. That's what's animating my research. This projection by 2042, white people are scheduled to no longer be the racial majority in this country. And we have this thing, and we see it played out in the election, where you have a graying older population and a browning younger population. And this, I found a conflict in terms of resources, where you had older residents saying, we want to pay less for public education. We want to pay less for the public sector sources that go to kids, because these kids no longer look like their grandkids. Conversely, what are we going to do with the public resources that go to our graying older population? So it's a tension that we're constantly seeing. And David, I'd be curious about your thoughts, how technology could bridge that gap between sort of the graying of America and the browning
I mean,
of America.
if Tim Berners-Lee's ideas were to actually work regarding, exposing you to other points of, I mean, obviously, there is a way to design technology that could bring people together. We just don't seem to have found it, would be my general point on that, and I don't believe it's impossible. But I will say, related to the Corey's question, and we'll get over here in a second, but in prepping with somebody else for a different session at this conference, especially relating to this question of Silicon Valley going off the rails or losing its soul, as we're going to find out later tonight, whether it did or not. This person was a New York technologist, said to me, when you get on the subway every day, it's very humbling in terms of what the world really is. I mean, New Yorkers particularly have a gift of awareness that is unmistakable and unavoidable every single frickin' day. And this person was saying, having lived in California and New York, that he thinks of the way he designs products differently in New York because of that in part, which I don't think is crazy. So with a New York point of view.
Thank you. My name is Clayton Banks, founder of Silicon Harlem, and I wanted to ask my question quickly so I can get to the bar.
You can get to the bar and still ask your question.
But I was feeling bad to just stand up and walk. So now that I've asked a question, I'm going to be able to go get my drink.
Okay.
So I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian here, and I will say that one of the I do have a question here, but since it's a town hall, I can make a statement.
Yeah,
I just think we're all the same. I mean, when you were out in quote-unquote Whitopia, I mean, did you really see that much of a difference in people? Weren't they nice? Weren't they humble? I mean, don't we all just have a lot in common? Aren't we all from America and all that kind of stuff? And I get the whole social construct that's been driven and why we have to be concerned about systemic issues and things of that nature, but at the end of the day, we're all the same. And in Harlem, for example, where I operate from, 20 years ago when I went to a town hall, mayor talked about the issues, the community talked about the issues, which was noise, at the time crime, garbage, and rats. Hello, anybody from New York? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. So why I say that is I don't mind someone who has a different opinion than me. I think I can out-argue them, but I don't mind that because that's what has made this country so phenomenal, is that we don't all agree. And I'm okay with that. As long as there's still that common humanity that we have that's going to make a difference in this country. And if you solve issues that people have, they become happier. If you can get rid of the rats in New York, we might stop drinking coffee. That's how happy we might be. So, I mean, I know we can't go that far. That's right. So, my simple question to you is, as you were in these environments, because I've been all over the world, every country, I've been in all places, and the same sort of question happens to me most places I go. And I like to visit people's homes, and the question's always like, hey, are you hungry? No matter where I go. And I'm curious, what is making, and if you call somebody white or you call somebody black, what's that supposed to mean?
Okay.
Can I go get my drink now?
That was a good one. You're entitled to have a drink after that.
As one of the resident skeptics, thank you for inviting us skeptics. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think we're interpreted as the same. I don't think we're treated as the same. I think there's things called institutions that perceive us differently and treat us differently. And it's not always predictable, black and white, in how that gets played out. But I saw that firsthand. And what I did notice is, yes, indeed, people are friendly. And I was very social. I had dinner parties. I was there for 2 years. I traveled 27,000 miles. But what I did notice is a lot of these issues, the Second Amendment, immigration, DACA, healthcare, these become a proxy for racial issues, and these become a proxy of how race and racial resentment get expressed. And so you can talk about immigration and say, oh, we're all the same, and I'm not really talking about race, but in fact you are. And so, and I say that because people would talk about the places they left. For example, I left Tucson in order to go to St. George. I left LA in order to go to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And what did you leave behind? Those get described in racial terms.
Rich, are a lot of those ideas about the other a problem simply because they have not experienced the other? Or is that, I mean, it's not, in other words, is the whitopia self-reinforcing in that way? Or is there really some fun, I mean, you sound like you're saying to Clayton there's some fundamental difference that is based on historical, we've had real racism. We still have real racism. But there is this, I mean, what about this New York thing versus Coeur d'Alene? I mean, doesn't it change our brains a little bit?
Yes and no. So some people there have not experienced the other, meaning they've grown up historically in homogenous environments, and they're sixth generation of, name your place. Other people have fled LA or St. Louis because they literally tell me multiculturalism was done badly, and we're fed up. And so as one reason, and there's still the tax base, there's still the public school, there's still the natural amenities, but so yes and no, you have both. You have people who are always been in homogenous environments, and there's people who are fed up with what is perceived that multiculturalism was done badly.
I mean, it's sort of a bigger question even at a global scale. I mean, you look at all these countries fracturing along lines of hate, and you got to ask what could change that. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm a little confused.
Who are you?
I'm Larry Irving. I'm Irving Group, and I'm a political hack. Been working in politics since 1964. Since 1964, there hasn't been one presidential election with a majority of white Americans have voted for the Democratic nominee. Since 1952, there have only been 2 elections in which the majority of white Americans. That number is always somewhere between 53 and 62%. Always. Every election, that's the range. What happens is sometimes if you get a Southerner like Carter, or you get Clinton, then sometimes white folks might feel he's one of us, and they actually vote for a Democrat, more and closer than others. So what I'm trying to figure out is, what's changed? It seems like all that's happened is folks who weren't going to vote, who had racial issues, who weren't going to vote for full voting rights, who weren't going to vote for Social Security because it might help them, or health care because it might help them, have just moved to areas where there are more of them because they have the financial resources to do that. But in terms of actually affecting anything, and they're more scared, because more afraid, because they actually see an America in which they no longer have either male privilege or white privilege. But what's interesting is, even if you look at Stacey Abrams, 97% of black women voted for Stacey Abrams in Georgia. 25% of white women voted for Stacey Abrams. So white male patronage is not just something about white males, it's also endemic to a lot of white females. Look at yesterday. You had a white female senatorial candidate in Mississippi talking about she would attend a public hanging if it would help her campaign. Now, I mean, these dog whistles, this racism, it's as old as this country, and I don't understand how Whitopia changes any of this. It's just that you don't like me, so rather than live next to me, you move from me. But what's changed then, you know, in any analysis of how our elections are informed?
Okay, that's a
Pass it to Diane, but go ahead.
that's a great question, and I want to highlight your point that Republicans in presidential elections have garnered the majority of the white vote for men and for women since the dates you mentioned. And Trump won every category of white person, even educated white women by 3 percentage points. So what has changed? This isn't the country my parents grew up in. My dad couldn't have gone 27,000 miles 2 years to live in these places. I mean, we can't deny that interpersonal relations, how we treat each other as human beings, interpersonal race relations have drastically improved. That's one thing that's changed. And that's an interesting context for me to do that now in a way that I couldn't have done that in my dad's day. But
photographed rural white America 50 years ago. And he was as black as you or I are, and he went down to Mississippi and photographed white folks in Mississippi in the 1960s. So yeah, you're kind of good because you were the exception, or you were doing a study, or because you just were kind of there. But they weren't going to let you marry their sister then or now.
yeah, I won't speak to that comment. but yeah. But inflection points. So one, change, interpersonal relationships. Two, second change is demographics, right? Now we have Latinos coming in. Now we have 2042 when white, so that's another element of change that I'm looking at. And, you know, that's an argument to be had. I mean, what has changed? I mean, and we can get into the debate, you know, which indices are you going to look at, you know, health outcomes, education outcomes. You know, I could give you 10 indices of outcomes that have gotten better, whether it's on health, education, more middle-class black people, et cetera, or you could probably give me 10 more that you feel haven't changed. So.
Okay, Diane.
Step outside the country a sec to get your reaction, because I lived in Nairobi for a year, and I lived in Hong Kong, and the standard of living at each of those times was probably pretty similar in some ways, but the difference was if you change money in Nairobi, you'd change it on the streets, whereas everybody in Hong Kong seemed to have multi-currency accounts. And to me, the difference was that when you talk to people at that point under Arap Moi, they'd say they felt like 10 years from now the world was getting worse, whereas Hong Kong, they felt it was getting better. They were invested in the system. I just went to West Virginia for the first time, and not to in any way, you know, I know John Chambers is speaking tomorrow morning, but I had my very expensive Uber ride. There were two sisters in the car with the driver, and neither of them had gone to college, and they said, why bother? You know, so it almost seemed a little bit like that hopelessness, and that seemed to be the differentiator there. And that's what I always loved about the States, was especially from Canada, you came here and everybody was like, why not? And, you know, and that seems to have eroded somewhat, maybe more so in the Whitopia areas.
We do have another question over here.
Okay, wait, yeah, go for it. Hello.
Michelle Joseph from Brooklyn, representing Verizon,
Yeah.
just to let Harlem know. So my question is really around place and race, right? So this country has a long history of that conflicting with each other, but this conference is really focused on technology and harnessing the power of technology for responsible growth. But when we look at technology, and the entire industry, there's still that happening. It's a place issue, And also, it's a race issue. So how are we not duplicating the same things that's happening with midterm elections and our day-to-day interactions with the evolution of technology? So it's a town hall, so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mentioning with online organizing, mentioning with how apps have helped prove the vote. By the way, I saw Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp's debate live. I was helping shooting a documentary on voter suppression in Georgia. I was just there 2 weeks ago. But beyond, these concrete answers, maybe the audience has answers to how technology, and you don't mean that like big, you mean that granular, how technology is changing race and place.
That's what I was trying to talk about regarding the New York versus Silicon Valley. I mean,
exactly. It's
one
concentrated,
this will
and
probably
it's not
come up at
democratic.
8:30. I think. If whoever thinks Silicon Valley has lost its soul, and two of them do, it might be because of an insularity that is real. I mean, anybody who thinks Silicon Valley does not suffer from insularity is crazy. I mean, I'll yeah, really. You lived out here. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's different, right? I'll just give you an interesting example. I wrote a book about Facebook only because I lived in New York at the time. Because out here at that time, everybody thought Twitter had completely killed them. It's like they get into a mindset. I'm sorry, many of you live here, I know, but there's a mindset thing that is real, and it also is reinforced racially and educational-wise and academic, certain schools, all these things. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's a good question to the technologists in terms of the apps, in terms of what is being done, in terms of how we participate in politics through technology.
Hi, my name is Sanjay. I'm from Edelman. You mentioned place and race. I just wanted to get your thoughts if you had any observations on the role that media played in the way people thought, because just as an outsider living here, I mean, you literally live in two different worlds if you're in Fox world or the non-Fox world. So what's your take? I mean, how much influence is media playing in the way people think and how their beliefs and stuffs are reiterated in their minds?
Very good question. Thank you.
It's significant. It's significant. And they're doing studies on even the greater polarization of media. And it's interesting to get the politicians' take. So, for example, Claire McCaskill, who lost badly in Missouri, which has on the order of 13 Whitetopian counties, which is a lot for a state that's not that big. She would say that she would go meet constituents, and one of the first things they would cite to her is what they'd seen on Fox News, and more specifically what they had seen about the caravans. So the media is huge. The media is huge.
We actually probably need to actually stop ideating for a few hours. But, one of the things I know that you were concerned about, and this is not exactly the same topic, but I'd love to hear you talk about it because you think about these things very methodically. The Democratic Party. Give us your observations on that.
Even on the record, I think the National Democratic Party is a hot mess.
A hot mess.
A hot mess. I think that if one, by the way, and I think people could interpret the 2010 midterms in two ways. One could say that Trump held a lot of political ground and did better than expected, and one could say that the record number of new voters and that the record number of women and LGBT and people of color candidates would suggest that the left won. I think I haven't made up my mind on that. But to your question, I don't think that if you subscribe to the idea that the left came out ahead in the midterms, I don't think that's attributable at all to the National Democratic Party. And I just mentioned I'd been in Georgia. I'd spoken to longtime big donors in Atlanta about their opinions of the Democratic Party, and they're shaking their head. They said they made the wrong choice of leadership when elections were held 2 years ago. They haven't strategized and understood the way that Howard Dean innovated media, the way that OFA, Obama's outfit, innovated the media, and for now, they're really not on their game. And they did decently enough, but...
It's interesting, though, the way you said the left as if it was the Democratic Party. Is that what you would like to see the Democratic Party be? Because, frankly, I'm not sure that's a winning strategy either. I mean, so, I mean, that's a whole other debate, but
That was a verbal slip in the way that they conflate Trump with conservatism. They're not always necessarily the same thing, and you're right, the left isn't necessarily the
But I
same
mean,
thing as the Democratic Party.
yeah, the Democratic Party doesn't know what it is, it would seem to me.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a story. They don't have a story. I mean, as an anecdote, I remember after the second debate between Clinton and Trump, a lot of elites were saying, oh, Hillary won, of course. And then in my gut, I said, no, Trump won. In that debate, he told a story. He said, China did this to you. He said, the Mexicans are doing this to you. Agree or not, it was a story and a narrative of the past and of the future. And I think that the Democratic Party and the left, not to use them interchangeably, they've lost a mojo. They've lost a sense of what they stand for. And part of this, perhaps one could say this is healthy in terms of determining changing. They have values, but values isn't the same as a vision. How do you transform values into a vision? And I don't think they've done that, let alone in organizing strategy around that vision.
I'm glad I asked. Okay, I was hoping there would be a desperate hand up because I wanted to hear at least one more voice before we wrap up. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, Bhaskar Chakravorty from the Fletcher School at Tufts.
Good to have you here.
So I want to sort of pick up on this last question about the Democrats, their message, and the Republicans and their message. And I'm wondering the extent to which technology itself has played a role in mediating that message.
Thank you.
So going back to the business model that we were talking about earlier this afternoon, the business model is about getting eyeballs, getting attention. And attention automatically goes to the polar extremes. And poles are defined by simple messaging. So if my message is, I'm going to cut taxes, I'm going to create jobs, and there's a caravan out there that I'm going to, stop with, all the force I have, that gets attention. An alternative message that involves a narrative, that involves a set of complete sentences that make up a paragraph, some nuance, is not going to get picked up. So the Democrats automatically are playing on a not level playing field if, those are the alternative positions that the two parties are going to take. So I'm wondering whether technology inherently is kind of shaping a field that is against any kind of nuance in messaging.
Interesting. I'm trying to think of examples around the world where a centrist person got eyeballs, and maybe Macron, for whatever showbiz sense he has, was able to get eyeballs. But part of me doesn't want to agree with your premise because it sounds so defeatist and it sounds so basically improve America and run a better country by eyeballs. But maybe you're right.